on their part. One could add, I mean, for example, I mentioned that we don't know what the motive of many people was who did painting and music, because all we know is they would have been very afraid of not being thought faithful, and with good reason. For example, Giuseppe Verdi was a non-believer. In his case, we happen to know about a great composer. Didn't believe in God. Didn't prevent him from writing an absolutely wonderful requiem. So it's a question of to what extent these two things, and related ones too, are contingent upon one another. I don't have a settled view of that. That's why I ended on the Parthenon, saying I think that the cultural task is to transcend, by argument, by cultural philosophical reflection, the legacy of religion, to say that we can have the Parthenon without the belief in Pallas Athena, without the cult of Eleusis, without the probability that some of the friezes on the Parthenon actually display a human sacrifice or the preparation for one. Without Athenian imperialism, we can discard that and keep what is of lasting and enduring value. That, for me, at any rate, is the great cultural undertaking of our time.
But that the flip side may also be true, that we can have all of those things, and that they did come from faith. If you say we don't know, and it may be true that none of this did emerge out of religion, then the opposite is true as well, is it not? We don't know.
Professor Brummett, in responding to me, said, yes, okay, there were some barbarous warlords and monarchs and so forth, but they adopted Christianity opportunistically. Again, I think that's so true as to be almost obvious. We don't know about the Christian message because of what happened during the execution of a charismatic rabbi under the government of Pontius Pilate. We would never have heard about it if it wasn't for a later emperor of that empire, the Emperor Justinian, and later the Emperor Constantine, adopting it as official dogma of the Roman Empire. That's how it comes to us. And those, of course, were opportunistic conversions. It was a Protestant king, King Henry, who agreed to convert to Catholicism to gain the throne and control of Paris, and his remark that Paris is worth a mass stays with us, I think, for an excellent reason. It just goes to underline and emphasize what I said before. This is all man-made. It all proceeds from unresolved contradictions in the material world. The dialectic, as you might say.
Okay. Professor Brummett, let me ask you now a question based on your presentation. Once again, back to the resolution, religion has been a positive force in culture. So you've talked at great length about extremism. And your argument seems to, and you talked about the three strands: dogmatic fundamentalism, apocalyptic belief, and a tendency towards perfection, you said. And then you talked about some solutions and antidotes, and what's the other way to think as a way. And your argument seems to be extremism is not limited to religion, but I don't understand where that fits in terms of the question at hand. Has religion been a positive force in culture?
Well, the reason why I didn't take that up with a straight yes or no is because I think the answer is it depends, and I think it depends for the reasons that I tried to cover. I think it's complicated. Number of people in the days preceding this talked to me about the debate, and I kept saying, I'm not sure it's going to be a debate. I think it's going to be a dialogue. I think it's going to be a conversation, which I'm very glad to see has turned out to be that way, despite some disagreement. So my answer would be that it depends. And I think it's whether religion takes on an extremist form or not. Let me also just add, though, the point that I made, I think, in my last response, which is that when we talk about culture in the sense that the resolution puts it, I think we need to think about not just high art, not just high culture, but what effect has religion, whether extremist or not extremist, had on people's everyday culture, on popular culture, and how people live their everyday lives in that way.
I was only picking up on that, the definition of culture based on Mr. Hitchens' anecdote, but if I modify the question slightly, then will you be able to answer it? If I say, can religion be a positive force in culture, what would your answer be?
I would say it depends on what you mean by... I'm an academic. I'm paid to do this kind of thing. It depends on what you mean by religion. Mr. Hitchens is entirely correct to say that the religious systems that we're talking about are human-made. Absolutely they are. Which says nothing about whether they are extremist or not extremist systems. So I think it's a very complicated question. I think it's a very knotty question. I'm not sure there's a clear answer. I think it depends on the form that religion takes. I think that there are forms of religion that have produced culture that is not necessarily extremist because those forms of religion are not necessarily extremist. I don't think religion has to be extremist, although, as I said, I think Mr. Hitchens is definitely correct to warn us about the perils here, because I think religion has the temptation to skew extremist for a number of reasons. So we need to be on our guard for that. But I don't think it has to be. So I'm going to weasel out of the question yet again by saying I think it depends.
I think actually we got an answer in between the disclaimers. I think there was something in there. I want to just, if you want to, I want to open this up to the audience at this point. So just put your hand up and I will come to you. In the meantime, Mr. Hitchens, I just want to ask you if you have any rebuttal to what you just heard, that exchange and what Professor Brummett just said.
Well, I don't want to be the one who stands between the audience and its question time. I don't know how well off we are for time.
We're doing pretty well.
I think I would want to say one thing, though, if I might, which is this, because the third leg of Professor Brummett's proposition, that of perfection, we haven't addressed yet. It's incredibly important and very interesting to me. Oscar Wilde wrote once that a map of the world that didn't include utopia wouldn't be worth glancing at. I used to think that was a wonderful statement, and I'm now very unsure of it indeed. I think it may be seductive, and certainly the idea of just doing without the idea of utopia when constructing your map makes you feel you've lost something, possibly something rather beautiful. Nonetheless, maybe a seduction into something very deadly. The idea of teleology, of the possibility of a radiant and almost ultimate future, is a very hard one to drop. I spent a lot of my life as a member of a Marxist organization. I learned a lot from that. A lot of it was well worth knowing. But as I gradually transcended and began to discard at least some of it, trying to salvage what I could and make use of it, I think the giving up of the teleological was almost the hardest. It's a very hard thing for people to do. To say perhaps we're not going to arrive at a point where I would know enough to tell you with real authority what you should do. In other words, that I would become the subject rather than the object of that sentence about the sure and the certain. I'm pretty sure, pretty certain, in fact, that I won't ever know enough to be in that position, and no one should trust me if I ever looked as if I was going to. The beauty and the interest, the consuming beauty and interest of the struggle to master science and philosophy and physics and the extraordinary new and wonderful discoveries that we're making. Just the preoccupation with those enormous questions is more than enough for a lifetime, much more than enough. And it's, I think, a shame that for many people it takes almost a lifetime to find that out.
Okay. So we've got about 15 to 20 minutes here, or slightly longer. And I would ask you to keep your questions relatively economical and to the point, and you can either address them to either one of our debaters or we'll get both to answer the question. So I'm seeing a hand over here, and then I'll go back there. Yes, sir. Okay. So the gentleman... Okay. The gentleman says he's not a scholar. But his question, I think, to both of you is, I'll start with you, Professor Brummett, is there enough art to pay for, I guess, to justify the lives that have been lost in the name of religion?
Well, the proposition, of course, asks about culture. It doesn't ask about art, which is one of the points I wanted to make. Well, but the shirt you have on, and that's culture, you know. And well, it's a wonderful shirt. It's just a marvelous thing, and I'm better for it. I don't think you can tot all that up, because you'll never get it all on the same scale. Let me rephrase the question, which is it the same thing about religion that's producing the Inquisition that also produces art and culture? Is it the same thing? If so, then that question makes more sense. If it's different aspects of religion, then I think we would be justified in saying, let's try to work against whatever it was that produced the Inquisition, and let's try to encourage whatever it was that produces art and culture, including your very fine shirt, and separate that out. I'll let Mr. Hitchens.
Okay, Mr. Hitchens,
Well, yes. I mean, I think I'm an answer is particularly exacted of me, because if there's a confusion here, it must be my fault. I didn't want to set up a false dichotomy between religion and culture, or I'm sorry, culture and religion here, in the sense of saying they were mutually exclusive, any more than I would say that you couldn't have one without the other. What I hoped we would do, certainly what I hope we've provoked people to thinking about, is to find out what the best contingencies are in which culture flourishes, to see if faith is one of those, and if it is not, if it is found that culture can be produced without faith and without the political systems and social systems that go with it, most of them tending to be tyrannical, then that would be a very great thing. And that's why I adduced the example of the Parthenon. Because, for example, I've been to many of the other monuments of antiquity. I've been to Babylon, I've been to Baalbek, to Karnak, I've been to the Great Zimbabwe ruins in Africa. So it's very hard to visit them without being acutely aware they were built by slaves. Somehow it shows they're built to impose, to impress, to show who's in charge. And that, for me, takes away their cultural contribution a little bit, just a little bit, but an important bit, in the way the Parthenon does not. The Parthenon is light and open and is the work of many hands directed by superb cultural and artistic producers. If we take a very pressing contemporary example, what would you say, I'll answer my own question, but what would you say the culture of Persia used to be best known for? What do we owe to Persia in terms of human culture? Well, the poetry of Hafez and of Omar Khayyam, quite probably the discovery of sherbet, the making of wonderful wine in Shiraz, one of the finest wines ever produced, the games of backgammon and chess. If we can have shirts, Professor, and I agree with you that culture is very wide, I think we have to include these as human achievements too. Now, all of these are actually specifically negated by the idea that Iran needs faith in order to have a culture. All of the wonderful things that I've just mentioned, and they're by no means exhaustive, are repressed, disfigured, sent into exile as far as is possible by those who know they are right, by those who already know that they have all the information that they need, by those who already have all the moral authority that could possibly be needed. This is a terrible situation, and it's made more terrible by the increasingly likely prospect that people who know they're right, this to address the perfection question, Professor Brummett, are about to become the possessors of apocalyptic weaponry.